Well, our intro stalled out there, so I guess we will just have to get right into it. After a long hiatus, not really that long, 2 weeks, I'm back with another episode of Explain Yourself. It's good to be back. Hope everybody has been doing well, had a good Easter holiday and everything. But I'll just get to it because I know everybody would like to see some cool comics and talk with some great creators. So we have Daniel Kalban with us today. He's going to talk about American Dreams. Daniel, how's it going, man?
Good, and happy Star Wars Day.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I would have forgotten, except I'm trying to find time to play the Star Wars Fortnite with my nephews. I finally get the lightsaber. I got my Luke Skywalker on Dagobah skin, which is what I've always wanted, so I'm pretty pumped. In fact, I just won a game before we started up here.
Nice. My cousin's husband worked on Fortnite for a while. He was like one of the programmers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I actually ended up getting from him some of the, I guess, the Fortnite, Marvel, and DC stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
One of my favorite covers of all time is that Jim Lee cover of Snake Eyes fighting Batman in Fortnite.
Yeah, I have the graphic novel upstairs, and I think I had the artist, who was, I think, Cully Hammer, who was the interior artist of that one.
I think he was. I read that the other day.
Yeah, I think he drew a little Batman sketch remark for me in that one.
Oh, sweet.
At New York Comic Con once, so.
No, that's one of my.
Sorry, and I think I posted for Star Wars. Hey, Joey. I think for Star Wars, I posted a couple hours ago my picture with Chewbacca from Disneyland last summer because I didn't see to pull up something fast. And unfortunately, the lightsaber I got at Disneyland ran out of batteries, which I need to replace. So I couldn't do anything with that.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I hope they keep the Star Wars theme in Fortnite around for a few more days because what I do is I'll play. If I win, I keep the crown, and then when I get on with my nephews, they're like, "Oh, you have a crown! You won the last game!" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I didn't even know this." Just act really cool, like I'm very good at this game, and I'm not very good at all. But I'm pumped for that.
I think the only time I played Fortnite, limited time I played Fortnite, I think I only won once. It was like a team one too, so it doesn't count.
No, I started. I had a Switch for a few years, and then my nephews were playing it. We figured out we could like cooperate and talk and kind of do a Call of Duty thing there. So that's really the only video game I play anymore. But yeah, it's fun. But anyway, while I could talk about Fortnite all night, probably actually really couldn't. Kind of exhausted my knowledge of it. But yeah, so let's talk about American Dreams. I've been aware of this comic for a while and read some of it. But give us the quick pitch on just the character in the world, and then we'll get into like the specific issue and what's going on with the character now.
Right. It's New York City, 1900s. We're talking about the Gilded Age of American history. A Jewish immigrant by the name of Jake Gold gained superpowers from a Thomas Edison experiment gone horribly wrong, and now he has to decide what to do with them. And this is our 6th issue, but it's the first issue of our brand new arc. So there's a way to catch. We do have ways to catch up in this Kickstarter. So this is him, a couple months later, and it's Memorial Day, then called Remembrance Day in New York City, and some bad stuff is about to go down, and everybody's going to have to swoop in to save the day. We introduce new bad guys. We introduce new allies.
Very cool. So I like this character. What I really love about this book is that you've got the New York, that you really place it in a very specific point of New York history that I'm really interested in. I've watched that Ken Burns documentary like a million times. So it's cool to see you bring in some of the history of that period because it was just such a great, interesting time as far as things changing and things changing quickly. You had different experiences. I think we're probably miserable living at some points, but very dramatic, and I think lend themselves to stories, especially kind of wish fulfillment, comic booky type stories. And you also, if you're bringing in characters from history, you have so many colorful, interesting people that were around New York doing amazing things at this time, good and bad, that you can draw on. So how much history, like, do you bring in? I know you bring in Thomas Edison a little bit. Kind of how much do you kind of balance that out and give us like that sort of young Indiana Jones thing where you're meeting this character and kind of tying them into the fictional character in the world?
Well, we have a big cast of historical and fictional characters. Some are on our hero side, some are not, and some are kind of in between. We have Nellie Bly, the famous journalist. We have Harry Houdini, who is our main character's employer. We have Emma Goldman, the famous anarchist activist. We have, on the villain side, we have Edison, as we mentioned. We have J.P. Morgan, the infamous banker. And, of course, our villain of all villains for this comic book, Aleister Crowley, the famous cultist,
Oh yeah.
who acts as kind of like
Yeah, I've
a
meant to
dark
read more
Funhouse
about
mirror
that guy.
version of our protagonist in many
Okay.
ways.
I've always found him interesting, mostly in just the end of his life, because he, after doing all this crazy weird stuff, just really bizarre, evil nonsense. I think I read that he kind of had a kid, and then he had all these followers, but he's like, guys, I just kind of want to be a dad for the last few years of my life. Let's chill with all this stuff, and kind of ended up being this very mundane person, like right at the end. Is that correct, or am I imagining that?
That's pretty correct, but this is a
Okay.
somewhat fictionalized version of Aleister Crowley. He's independently evil at this point. He's 25 and nasty as hell.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's definitely not the arc. It lends itself to a comic book story.
No,
But I always
this is
find that
these are his
interesting and amusing
early
about him.
days, fresh off of his explorations elsewhere. This is the Crowley who will literally walk right past a mountain expedition he started with the funds as everyone else is recovering from an avalanche.
Hmm.
This is the level of asshole Aleister Crowley is, and this is Aleister Crowley of actual magic.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I
And
would
he's not
figure.
above using his own alliances for his own gain.
So give me a quick rundown on, because I know some anecdotes about him. I don't really know. Like, I know he had like kind of a cult thing. I know it was a cult.
Yeah, Thelema, which was
Yeah.
his occult religion, but this is a fictionalized version. So in this version, he's actually running an actual cult of something probably much more malevolent, and we have
Okay.
had hints of that throughout the first arc.
Yeah,
And
very
it's
cool.
for
So,
those of you, and because it's kind of revealed in our first arc, it's connected to Cthulhu's Ancient Ones.
okay.
Right,
I
there's
always
also-
disappoint people when I say this because I just do not know much about Cthulhu and all the Lovecraft stuff like at all. And literally every friend group in my life, everybody's super into it. I just never quite connected to it or understood it. But everybody, I think they lend themselves to comics so well. I can see why everybody uses so much of that. But that's definitely an awesome tie-in to kind of, you have this real person, sort of, you're making a fictionalized version of them, and then bringing in this other stuff that I think there's something cool about. I mean, what we love about mainstream DC Marvel stuff is there's all this history. You can bring in these characters and that characters. You can refer to previous story arcs, and that gives it a bit of a history. Even if you don't know the stuff, you can go back, or maybe you're intrigued by the editor's note that says, "Oh, this happened in X-Men 34." Go back and check it out. I think using things like that you can use legally, and historical figures that you can use, like, gives you a little bit of that sensation, I think, with indie comics. That's something I try to do as well.
Yeah. It's also just fun to see how these various characters will react to something like a superhero this early in the time period, because to the best of my knowledge, there's not really many stories where superheroes show up in the 1900s. There's some steampunk versions, like with Gotham by Gotham,
Well, I
like
think what's
Batman,
really interesting is,
Golden Age characters, but there's nothing like really right in that middle, 1890s, 1900s characters, outside of something a little more steampunk.
yeah.
And
Well,
so
I think that's such a good fit because you read like The Jungle, or you read the Muckraker stuff. Look at those pictures. It's a time which is such intense inequality and misery. People just living in horrible conditions. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory happening, things that were just like really horrible, that would inspire all this outrage. And it's one of those periods where you just are like, God, can't Superman be there and fix that guy
there
for doing
is
this thing? And I think that's a good way to do this.
There is an incident in issue 2 of American Dreams that is a nod to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire.
I think I remember that. I think we talked about that once. I can't remember if it was here and maybe Travis's creator roundtable thing or something, but I do remember you did refer to that.
Yeah.
Which is, it's such an interesting thing.
Yeah.
In terms of, that was one of the things that actually changed. I'm sorry, what?
I think I said in the Bowery, though, not where it actually happened, which is now at a building owned by NYU by Union Square. So I did a different.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought that was further north.
Yeah, it's by Union Square. So I did a version of it's like a pre-Shirtwaist Factory Fire, similar events influenced this fictional one.
Oh yeah, I've ruined a lot of good, not large parts of my stories, but I've done things where I'm like, it would be a better flow if this happened this way, or this, even like I had the West Side Highway when it was still a highway,
Mhm.
in one of my comics, and I'm like, this should really go left or right on the page, but I can't make myself do it because I know where they are and they're heading south, and I'm just gonna have to draw it that way. Like I
Yeah.
really get into that stuff.
Yeah. So
But yeah, that's
I massage history for this.
yeah, no,
And I
that's the
made
right
sure
thing to do.
the Triangle Voice Factory Fire by something similar too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's an interesting event in that that's one of the things that really did inspire change, which is kind of crazy to imagine. You had all these horrible things happening, people didn't seem to care. That was one of the things where, I mean, I think Al Smith was pretty instrumental in that too. Just like, hey, I'm gonna go and get something done about this. And I think that's when you think about the wish fulfillment that you get from superhero books. That's kind of the whole thing. You want to be Superman when you're a kid because you see something unfair or horrible or tragic happening, and you just want to be a hero and you want to fix it. In a dramatic way. And that's, I think, the core of the whole superhero fantasy, at least the mythological part of it that you connect to primarily when you're younger and stuff like that. And I think this was almost the period in history that we can still connect to and imagine that more than anything, even I think more than the Depression, and superheroes actually were invented more or less, that you really look at and think, oh my God, what if there was a guy that could just do something about this? Because there were all these horrible, horrible things happening. So that's one of the things I really liked about the core concept of this is you've got someone who's attached to a group in New York that didn't have it easy then, when things were just really, really bad. I think it's almost that point where you want to see somebody step up and do something, and it makes it really fun.
Yeah. And it's also just because it's interesting to just
Sorry.
do an era of New York that
but yeah, was that something you kind of planned very intentionally, or was it just something that you kind of came to maybe through the historical figures, or kind of what was your impetus to put it right at that point in history?
So we're giving the brainstorm for this, but I was listening to the soundtrack of Ragtime, and I said, what if there was a superhero in that era? So that's the first light bulb, because this was 2016 when I started writing the first draft, and there was an election at that time, so that was kind of a
there was an election then. Yeah, kind of remember.
It was kind of like holding up a mirror to our era for that. I figured it has to be Jewish because I'm Jewish, and I figured it has to be an immigrant because a lot of the stories we have say they're immigrants, but we don't really see immigrants of this era having superpowers. Especially since he'd be at the bottom of that national pile as a Jewish immigrant. Despite one who's lived most of his life in New York, he would have a kind of underdog feel, even with this amazing amount of power. It also
I think that's a good.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. We have a bit of a delay here. I think my internet's a little slow today.
Yeah.
We had some
so it also that whole Gilded Age gives a nice backdrop of everything again because all these historical characters are there. For the playoff, we actually introduced a couple more this series, starting with our first arc. I mean, it's our first issue of the second arc, which is this new issue 6. And a lot of the new allies. And this is also another character who will be, at least at first, do we trust him or do we not trust him? Because he's a historical figure with immense power in New York at this time of history, which it's Governor Roosevelt, Governor Teddy Roosevelt.
Okay.
Not to be confused with the later Governor Roosevelt, who also later became president. But this is like Teddy Roosevelt before he becomes vice president. Like this is the year he'll become vice president, 1900.
Oh no, I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt nerd. I'm very familiar with the timeline there.
Well, this is more for the general audience at home.
Well, that's interesting. I was going to ask you about this. I had this in my notes. There was a period where he was the police commissioner, kind of. He was on a committee with 4 other guys, or 3 other guys. He was the 4th.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. There's a whole book I read about it, which was almost superfluous. The whole book was essentially he was an honest person. There were 2 corrupt guys. There was one other honest person there that he just couldn't get along with. and those two guys hated him, and this other guy hated each other so much they couldn't get anything done. And the book was just essentially anecdote after anecdote of things not working out. Which is not to say his tenure as commissioner was completely unsuccessful. He did some pretty good things. But yeah, I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt fan. I guess I don't know what to call that.
Yeah, and that's like 20 years prior.
And they've explored that in a few series.
Yeah, I think it's 20 years
prior.
Like,
that was
Alienist. So also another kind of quasi.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah,
Alienist. Both the book, first the book, then the series. I read the book first by like a couple years before the show came out. So.
Oh yeah, I like that show. My wife got into it and brought me along. I'm a sucker for that point of history, so it was not a difficult sell.
And again, a lot of similar characters show up historically.
Yeah,
you leave J.P. Morgan.
I even love in
antagonist. But good coincidence, because I was writing the first drafts of this before I got to Alienist, so it's like, oh, I'm on the same one. But my life, at least.
I think I'm losing you a little bit here.
Even a little patchy.
Let's turn off our cameras. Maybe that will will help. Sometimes that brings up the audio a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, cool. But yeah, we're just tiny faces on the corner anyway. I don't think anybody's watching to see my face. That's all right. I can take it. But yeah, I think that's. I even remember in Gotham by Gaslight, they kept Commissioner Gordon, or I think they just called him the commissioner, but he was very clearly Teddy Roosevelt, the way Magnolia drew him, and I always liked that. But yeah, I just think that's such a fertile period of history for New York history, especially. And I think you even look at like things like Godfather 2, where you really. They kind of just go through this whole experience of Vito Corleone coming over on the boat. He's on Ellis Island. He's quarantined. He just comes up from nothing. And people do attach themselves to the underdogness of that. And I think that's a great, in the same way you attach yourself to a superhero and you want to see, I think of the Fleischer Brother cartoons where probably the best interpretation of Superman, maybe tied with Christopher Reeve. But the structure of those stories was so great because they'd they introduce a problem, they'd let Superman get beat up a little bit, then he'd come back in the third act and sort of like when Popeye eats his spinach, just come back and beat everybody up. But you have that little up and down and you get a little bit of an underdog idea with the character. It makes it so much fun to see them triumph. And I think that's something that you've really structured this in a way that I think lets you, go through that pattern in a little bit more of a nuanced way, which I really like to see. Was that something you planned out really specifically? Like kind of like I want them to have power in this way, but maybe not power and disadvantages in this other way?
Well, the first arc was mainly a bit seat of my pants. But I basically figured out, because originally I wanted it to be this bigger story, and then I was told condense. So I said I just have to do like the first kind of like arc instead of doing this big grand thing where I can really stretch out. So that one he went up against this thug named Amalek, got the stuffing kicked out of him, and comes roaring back to fight, and defeat this villain. Whereas this second arc, it'll be much more throughout the story, a little more psychological and emotional, because someone's going to use some stuff against him that's going to just cause chaos, as you can see here.
Yeah, I love the art and the colors here. By the way, your artist is doing a great job.
I have a great team working on this book.
And I like to see how you really, I think the history and the stuff you're bringing into it enables you to do that. You mentioned that this is kind of the first arc was a little more simple, and that you have a villain, they fight, that gets resolved. And I think it sounds like you're describing he's at a point in his superhero career that he's got to consider the ramifications of what he's doing a little bit, or deal with the things that happen because he's out there doing these things.
Right.
The other side is going to react to what you're doing, and that you're going to have to change things up, which is cool to see.
Yeah. And it just becomes, and the fact that it's going to be new heroes coming in to save the day might not, and how they have perspectives as well is going to be very interesting as well. So we meet one of our new characters here, Augie, who is a African American youth who is calling for racial equality and more civil rights for the African American community, especially since his father fought in the Civil War as a black soldier. But he ends up becoming allied with other people who may or may not have cross purposes.
Oh, very cool. So that kind of brings me to another note I had. This comic is the centerpiece of a universe you're building. You did a comic called Rook and Knight a few years ago.
Yep.
Do I have the title for that right?
Yep, and Night Rush before that.
Yeah. Which are in different periods of history. And I thought I really liked Rook and Knight, but I think my favorite moment in that was when I did not realize these were connected, that you had some characters crossing over here. So without being explicitly spoilery about this, although that comic's been out a while, the American Dream is kind of the centerpiece of this universe. So he obviously lives on for a while, and the world kind of evolves with him. So this is clearly the formative years for him, but this is connected to a much larger universe that goes way down the line to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, kind of modern times. Is that right?
Yeah. Night Ref and Rook and Knight are modern times. They're present day.
Okay, cool. Oh, I was wondering. I thought Night Ref was in the 90s, but
we just been 90s influenced by modern day.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, so that's a really fun thing, I think, too. And it was fun to have what I guess I would call like an Avengers moment there. I was like, oh wow, that guy's here. I didn't think he was going to show up or that was a possibility, but I really liked it. That was a fun thing to have happen. A good surprise that was just really fun and they had a lot of value. So obviously the world is expanding around him with this character and some others. How big do you see this universe getting?
As big as they can logically make it, but for now, it's just the 3 titles for now. I might have another spin-off coming down the line, and hopefully that'll all lead to our first real crossover of our first big event.
Cool.
I have to get this volume done, Rook and Knight Volume 1 done, Night Ref Volume 1 done, and the other spin-off Volume 1 done before I can feel like, yes, I'm comfortable enough now just to go into event mode.
Yeah.
So I already have quite the concept for it.
No, that's good. I've struggled with that a little bit with Where Is Scarlet Twilight, in that I was very strict with history to a certain degree, made this big time jump and change, and then I had to kind of figure out. I don't think when I did that initially, which worked very well in the first issue and hit the right notes, there were so many things. I'm like, okay, what kind of alternate history? It's one thing to just change events at a certain point in one story, and it makes sense. But then you're like, well, okay, but then this never happened, and then that never happened, and this thing never happened. And you really do have to find ways to explain that in interesting ways. And hopefully, like, I think some things I had to decide I was going to write off in fun ways, or I had to address and made them a joke, or made them, just address them to a point where nobody would, if they were big enough where I thought people would read it and say, oh yeah, but what happened at this point in history? Was there a Cuban Missile Crisis? Was there this? Was there that? And I'd have to find ways to either, if it was big enough, address it, or just take it off the board and try to do that in an interesting way. Has that been something you kind of thought about or come across as you've been planning out, this, I guess, almost a century spanning story?
It's in the back of my head. It's like, I just have to think, a lot of it, like certain big things have to stay as concrete points in time, like Doctor Who would say. Like certain things I can pat around here and there, some like additions to history, but I don't know if I can really do much in the way of subtracting without causing time to go, collapse on itself. I can enhance history, but I don't know if I'm going to distort it so much. Though it's already being distorted. But it's going to be distorted enough where history it'll rhyme, but there'll be difference to the music.
Yeah, I think I've seen other people doing alt history where it's like they make funny nods to things to kind of, and it's not just a joke, it's to show things are just this much different. They're not that different. Like this happened to Richard Nixon instead of what actually happened to him. And it's kind of like Watchmen did that a little bit, although it was more serious in that case, but it told us, it said something about the world when they did it. And that's something like I said, I was really struggled with that, because it's like, oh yeah, I thought I was just changing this thing, but if I went back to the world, which I've done, there was a lot more I had to think, like, okay, well, this didn't happen. Do they have this technology? And I almost had to go point by point and figure out ways to address all the issues that kind of butterfly affected out from that. And I think especially with this, because I think the big draw of this series is it's a superhero at this time with this background. Right. And if you get into further down the line, oh, okay, well, this never happened or that never happened. I think you can almost do like one thing like that in an alt history thing. Yeah. It's like you can do the South won the Civil War, or, like that type of thing. And it all goes out from there. But if you introduce, well, then this happened, but because of that, this happened, and that happened, and this happened, that just gets too confusing for people, I think, to absorb. So it's a tough one to crack. So I admire you for taking the world so much further forward with the superhero in it. Yeah. And keeping it so closely tied to history.
Yeah, because I figured it's like, why make it's like it's the idea of work smarter, not harder.
That's a good thing to think of when you're making comics. It is very, very easy to work harder and not smarter.
Yeah. But yeah,
there's research involved.
If you scroll down, another new character that we're introducing, Frank Lim. If you scroll down a little bit.
Is that this guy here?
Okay. Yes. So. He's basically he's kind of like Liberty. He's like a kind of a tough, streetwise person. You have some overbearing parents, but he's a little more of a charming rogue than Liberty's a little more upstanding. Frank's a little more roguish. Mm-hmm. But everything that's about to happen is going to really affect his life, including his relationship with his parents. Same way, what's about to happen is going to affect Augie's relationship with his parents in the city as well. Mm-hmm. Because someone's going to prey on a lot of fears very soon.
Very cool. That's another thing I wanted to bring up that I really liked about the issues of American Dreams I've read was the involvement with his family. I mean, they were living together in the cramped quarters that people lived in at that time. Yeah. And that just was a great. It reminded me of kind of the setup of some early Marvel comics where you had, Spider-Man living with Aunt May, dealing with all that stuff, but it did that in a way that was just so closely tied to this period and was different than what we'd seen. I really liked those scenes a lot. I thought they brought so much texture to the world, and it kind of gave it a reason for being. You'd think, like, why do another superhero that's like not Superman? Well, it's because you can throw in things like that are really fun. And not necessarily fun, but just you see that and you're like, well, yeah, that's meaningful and that's interesting. And that's a very big wrinkle that we haven't seen before with a character like that. Was that something you really wanted to put in there?
Yeah, because as I said, it enriches the character to have that kind of family support thing. And there is family tragedy. If you read issue, I say 3 of American Dreams, you find out at least one major member of his family, his grandmother, died in a pogrom in Russia. Mm-hmm. So I knew they were going to have to be very tight-knit. And we expand on it somewhat in this issue because we have, again, his brother and sister are very important supporting characters to his storyline. We have a little more scenes of the tenement as well.
Cool. Yeah, that was just, I thought, a really nice way to give it It's really nice. I'm trying to think about how to describe this without going on forever. When you read something that is interesting and unexpected, but also like, of course they would do that. That just seemed right. That's the way the family scenes felt in American Dreams. I really liked that. Yeah. I think, and again, it gave it. I think one of the things I read a lot about people trying to do indie superheroes like we do is you really need a good to do it. Otherwise, it's just like Superman, but not quite, or Batman, but not quite. Right. And this is the kind of thing that's like, yeah, okay, that's why I'm reading this book. This is why they did this, and it made it worth doing. I think that's something I always think about, partly as an artist. I'm like, hey, I'm going to spend months drawing this. I don't want to get 8 pages in, and I've done this, and think like, actually, this idea is just like not that good. It seemed good for a minute or a day or two. and I ran with it, but it didn't really have the legs it needed. And I think that's something that's really important to do. And I think this one does have that kind of legs, with the stories and the types of characters and situations you're exploring. But we're coming up on a half an hour, so we're going to take a quick break and then talk a little bit more. We're going to still talk about the story and everything like that, but also kind of what you're doing to get the word out and kind of what went into the process of creating this comic.
Click that mouse and warp into All Ages of Geek's website, your ultimate portal to everything geek culture. Here you'll find articles that speak your language, from the latest anime buzz to the coolest tech trends. Our mission? To celebrate geekdom in all its glory. Whether you're a gamer, a comic enthusiast, a 90s kid, or an anime aficionado, we've got something for you. Dive deep into them with All Ages of Geek.
Your comics take a lot of time and effort to create. Way too much to have them get damaged while shipping to your backers. Gemini Comic Supply mailers keep your comics safe in transit. Cooperating with me, but I guess I'll just talk about it. We have a deal with the collective that with Gemini Comic Supply that I used recently, and it saved me a lot of money. But if you enter the code Geek Collective 10, which is right in the description if you're on YouTube, along with links to American Dream and some other books that you should check out, you can get that code. When you're ordering your supplies to fulfill your books, you can enter that. You get 10% off, which can make a big difference. It did for me, and I certainly heard from a lot of other people that that was great to have available to them. So it also helps support this show, which is free to people to come on. We don't have to charge anything to anybody, and that's one of the ways we do it. So if you're looking at fulfilling a big order, I'm just getting done with one for one of your campaigns. You definitely want to take advantage of that. So you have all the supplies you need to get these books to your backers in good shape, and just save a little bit of money doing it. So I can't recommend that enough. Go to GeminiComicSupply.com and enter that code Geek Collective 10. All right, so less snazzy than I have this little commercial that plays, which has animation and everything, and I'm kind of sad I didn't get to show it. But let's get back to talking with Daniel about American Dream. So this is the 6th issue. It's the beginning of the 2nd arc. Tell us about kind of some of the things you've learned. This is a pretty, I'd say by indie comic standards, a pretty long-running series. What have you kind of changed about your approach to, say, putting together the comic itself with your art team, and I guess just also getting the word out and getting the book on Kickstarter and fulfilling, kind of making a successful campaign?
Well, the funny thing is, this actually was the second version of the 2nd arc. Originally, I was going to do a totally different concept. And I was on a podcast with my late editor, LaShawn Colvin, rest in peace, and she point blank said to me, "Danny, you have all these great characters, but you need to up your diversity of your characters." And I went to her and I said, "You're right." Tossed out what I was planning, and I started from scratch with this brand new arc. And I'm like, "Yes, I need to add more diverse characters," so that's how I came up with Augie and Frank, because she was right. Sometimes you have to throw out what you're working on and just start the whole concept of a second volume from scratch. It's sometimes what you have to do. But I knew I wanted to hit more of a psychological story, like not necessarily something that Liberty could fight with his fists throughout this 2nd arc. Though there are always going to be things he can fight with his fist. Because, superheroes, we wanted them to fight. Well, again, but those into the story are continuing things about prejudice, about, people standing up for the little guy, about just, sometimes having to soldier on when things are just horrible, and fighting back any way you can.
Yeah, that's cool. I've definitely been familiar with having to throw things out and rewrite them. I was reading an article with I think it was a novelist actually, who had a mentor who was a successful writer, who really said, like, you know what, you need to figure out the world for the story. So go ahead and write. You're itching to do the sort of world building segment. Go ahead and write 100, 200, however many pages it needs to be of that. And he went and did it. Took a long time. He brought it back to his mentor and said, "Okay, what do you think?" He's like, "Look, it's great. And you need to throw that out. Keep it on hand. Obviously, this is this cemented a lot of things that you thought you had figured out, but really didn't. And I don't think that meant necessarily like, oh, I thought the timeline made sense, but it didn't. But I think it was more of a tonal thing. When you bring up things that are, like a big part of this story, I think even the first one was prejudice and in the way people were treated then from different groups. Obviously, the next thing is like, well, you want to like, hey, there are other groups that do that. I think that's something that would be a pretty natural assumption for a reader to make. So the comment that your editor made, it's like, okay, that part of this plot needs to expand, which I think she was correct about.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you really do end up doing a lot as a writer. It's like, okay, I thought the story was going to be this, and I don't think it's necessarily a thing of taking, feedback from a specific person, or even to write to what your audience, what you imagine your audience wants to see. But it's kind of, you introduce things in a story, and when you can take time to reflect on them, you say, okay, it does need to expand. It needs to get bigger. The stakes need to raise, but that needs to happen in a way that maybe wasn't initially what I thought it would be. And then it really becomes clear and crystallized when somebody gives you a comment like that. And it always sucks to rework something, but I think that was a really insightful suggestion you got there. And I'm glad you incorporated it.
And to my luck, I hadn't even started that whole scripting phase yet. So it was easy to aside and then maybe reserve for another time.
Yeah, that's always easier to do. When I've written, invariably, and even things I'm very happy I cut down, there's something I lost, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back and put that in. That was such a good scene, or that was such a good character, or that would be such a good seed to plant for further stories. But it's one of those things that you just have to do as a writer. You have to kill some things you really like to get things the way they ought to be, or they ought to be at that time. I mean, like, I cut things for August that I'm very sad about. There were some amazing scenes that I just didn't work in the shorter version of the story I ended up publishing. And then there are things that I'm like, oh, I wish I had found a way to keep this one character scenes in, because I could build on that in a really cool way down the line. So and that would have been correct. That would have been the right thing to do. And it would have kept the pacing and all the gains I got from condensing the story. But yeah, that's such a hard, I've been lucky to work with editors when I have that have given me that feedback, and it's been good. And I'm glad to hear that you had that experience as well.
Yeah, and it also, going back to characters, like I said, Teddy Roosevelt's appearing in this story. He wouldn't have appeared until towards the end of that arc, and now he's towards the front, and he'll appear in a couple issues. Like certain characters who we saw a lot of last time, we might not necessarily see much of this time, but other historical figures and characters might come to the forefront a bit more, because it works narratively that they do so.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not going to be the only new historical figure who will be a prominent role, who will be first appears in this arc. I will say that Joseph Pulitzer, the famous editor, will later appear in this volume. And he will, of course, will make references to his rival William Randolph Hearst, because muckraking.
Yeah, no, I love that. We learned actually a lot about that in school. I don't think that was. I think it was just something that interested my particular history teachers, so we learned about it. Yeah. But that's something I think has so much to say about our current day stuff with media and the social media, the wars that we sort of fight with each other. About how information is portrayed and how news is portrayed, that is like almost directly analogous to what we have going on now. So I think that's just such a very good avenue to go down, I think, in producing this comic in 2025. And
I'd like to point out that two of our major characters do work directly for Pulitzer. So again, everything gets tied in a little bit with each other. I also managed, because it's Pulitzer, I also snuck in a Newsies joke somewhere, but you have to wait to see it, whereas when the issue appears in. But keep an eye out.
I have never seen Newsies. I know nothing about it, so one might go over my head.
Long story short, Pulitzer and Hearst raised the money for the paper boys to purchase the papers and then sell to readers.
Okay.
And the newsboys went on strike. the movie / Broadway show is a lot happier than the history, and Pulitzer is the one who gets more of the blame than any of the other publishers in that movie. But I guess it's because it just worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to sneak in a little joke about that movie / show in there because I just couldn't resist the opportunity. But it's very small, blinking miss a joke.
Knowing so many people that are very, very into that movie, or it's a play, I think, too, maybe.
Yes, it's become a Broadway show as well.
About that? Okay.
They rewrote it heavily too for the show stage. Probably for that
cool.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, and knowing so many people that are just very devoted to that, and the way that I think about Star Wars or something like that. If you're dealing with him, I think you almost have to throw something like that in there. In the same way, I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
What's funny about it is also the pre-Batman Christian Bale as the lead in that movie. Like,
no kidding.
It's like late teens, early 20s. He's playing a 16-year-old newsboy as because of the strike. A fictionalized version of it. Mm-hmm. Fictional version, but yes.
Yeah, that's cool. No idea. That guy really. That guy's had a career for a long time. I saw Empire with the Sun, which I sort of liked. I knew he was an actor when he was young, but I didn't know he was in that at all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's even with that's the kind of thing that I think you really have to, if you bring in Pulitzer, knowing the period, knowing how popular that movie and that story's been, you kind of have to put something in there. And I think Teddy Roosevelt's a figure that is.
Yes, he is.
Boy, he's the closest thing to a comic book character that may have ever existed in the real world. You almost, if you put something in this time period, and I think this of like Young Indiana Jones, I would watch that show and a bit, but they have to do this guy, right? Like he was so big, he was so important.
Yeah.
I think he is one that just like, if you're doing things that have a foot in the real world as the salt history thing, I'm almost wondering, but what's Teddy Roosevelt going to do about, how does he tie into this? And I think that about Tammany Hall a little bit too, other things, but him more than anything. So I'm glad to see that you're bringing him in, not just because I like him and I'm interested in him, but I think it's almost, he casts such a large shadow over New York history and the period itself that it's almost like you almost need to explain what he's doing or how he's affected by this.
Yeah, and I will say using Teddy Roosevelt a little goes a long way. But I just can't have like random historical figure just pop up and say, hey, I have to use him judiciously for the sake of the story. Like there's going to be one historical character from volume 1 who's going to be much more of a presence this time than he was in, I think, the last volume. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a story for him to be it that way.
Yeah, I think that's the right balance, especially for him, because not just because little goes a long way. I just think there's so many other comics, some of which we've mentioned, and then a few I think I've seen indie comics in the last 10, 15 years that are just like Teddy Roosevelt doing this or that. Some of them very close to history, some of them pretty wild and out there, sort of a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type thing. It's almost been done so much. I don't want to see a ton of it, but I want to see a little.
Yeah, because there's even a comic I remember reading when it was my late teens or late 20s, probably taken out from the Brooklyn Public Library. I think it was called Batman Detective 47, but was it Elseworld?
Yeah, I remember that. Peter Snijberger. I remember the artist's name. I don't remember who wrote it. And
Teddy Roosevelt has a small supporting role towards the beginning of the story. That's kind of like set up for when Bruce Wayne finally shows up. We need to bring in him and I think the what's it called? The Pinkertons.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was going to ask you. I know there was one. I confused that with the Bruce Wayne Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. that was in the Amalgam, one of the Marvel DC mashups. But yeah, he was a Pinkerton guy, and that brought the detective aspect in. I remember that one. I think actually, maybe Dan DiDio wrote that. I'm not sure. But yeah, I liked that one. I remember that at the time. It was pretty cool. The Batman also just lends himself to so many things that I think it's hard to. They've been done so many times. It's hard to remember which one is which. But but back to American Dream. So this campaign has 17 days to go. Looks like it'll meet its goal, but never feel good until you're there.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've kind of done differently this time out as opposed to other times? So whether that's due to how economic stuff's changing now, or just I think there's a very different thing to be considered when you're doing issue 1 of something than issue 6. How is
Yeah.
that? How is that? What's your approach been there?
Well, a lot of social media posts are as much as I can do. Given my day job is a little nuts right now, so I've been trying to post when I can. I need to do more updates from the prior campaigns. I have to go back and do those and give certain backers a heads up because I don't want them to go, "Why didn't work emails for this?" Because I had coworkers back my stuff before I did get automatic update from everything they backed. So I have to give a heads up like, "Hey, I'm about to do this thing. We're going to get an automatic thing because you backed prior." It's not me just spamming for the office email.
Yeah, I always see big results from doing updates and preview because, and then no matter, I always worry about doing it too much, and I probably could do it more, but I don't want to annoy people. At the same time, invariably, I've heard, "Oh, this was on issue 3. I never got anything. I never saw anything about it." So you're always missing somebody. But those updates to previous campaigns that people have backed, I mean, I'd always see a good bump from doing those.
Mm-hmm. So fingers crossed it will work out.
Yeah, hope so. I mean, I like this character a lot. I like I really like the world that you're building around him. He's kind of the super, like, I think he's the initial hero. Am I correct about that? He's kind of the first one in this world, and then everybody else kind of comes in around him. It's a fun universe, and then you've got Rook at Night, you've got Night Wrath. I think you're doing more Night Wrath. Am I correct about that?
It's being worked on right now. Just being inked and colored, and then it has to go to lettering, and you have to get covers for it. But it's being done, and Rook at Night 2 is being worked on as well.
Cool. Yeah, so this is a big world that has a lot of legs and a lot of places to go. So I think this is, and I think that's one of the cool things. I think more than it's very hard, I think, to find ways to really intrigue people, especially with an indie superhero. Like, you're always like, "Why are you doing this? There's already a Batman. There's already a Spider-Man." Is kind of what I hear from people, and I ask myself that too. I think you've done something here that has been very good at, and I guess my question will be, did you do this on purpose? But I think you've done everything you can in different ways to do the superhero you wanted to do, but also like give enough hooks to people that, like, "Oh, I like that this character showed up." Night Wrath is such a 90s comic, or a throwback to 90s comics that done in a modern way, that you bring people in that way. Rook at Night has its own stuff that's really fun. And then you bring this character into that world too. And this has obviously the alt history thing. I think you've given this comic and this universe a lot of reasons to exist. Was that something you really consciously, that's something when I'm developing a comic, and certainly when I was doing Scroll of Twilight, I had a few good ideas, and I'm like, this isn't quite enough. Did you ever kind of go through that process where you thought, like, this needs this other thing to attach to it, or did you kind of develop things based on thinking things like that?
It kind of just happened naturally, because originally I was like thinking to myself as I was planning. I wasn't like originally planning to make this whole Liberty verse, but just kind of the pieces just started snapping together a little more naturally. Like Night Wrath, I think, was the one where it's like started going, maybe we could bring it in more into that and somehow connect it. And Rook at Night was written directly to be part of that universe.
Mm-hmm.
So those pieces are starting to. So one was a little more by accident, one's more purposeful. Like, I need to start expanding this world a little bit more, and each there'll be more, I think, direct. I think with Rook at Night and Night Wrath in their respective first volumes, but you'll see it grow a little bit bigger, and you'll see there's a lot more out there that those seeds I can plant and could go into whole new gardens of stories to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that really made me so happy when he showed up with Rook at Night is I was familiar with him, and you described how he's an underdog in a lot of ways when he starts out, which is cool. And that reads, I get that.
Yeah.
Thinking of him decades later being around and still being kind of like the superhero, I think, wow, his position must have changed a lot in ways that we don't, aside from Elseworld stories, that we don't really get from Superman or from Captain America. A little more in Marvel stuff, but like that's like, oh, okay, cool. Not only is that interesting, just that they're connected, but it's interesting to think of like, oh, okay, he's here. He looks like he looks in that story. That's going to be very interesting to see what his role has been in the time in between. And it's something I really like is when you jump around in timelines. I've always been intrigued by that. I'm like, I instantly start thinking about, okay, well, what happened in between there? I think that's just such a good story hack, and it's fun to see that happen. But before we wrap it up here, this obviously is the beginning of a new story arc. I think we mentioned that. Oh, and I should mention that this and the other books we're going to start showing are all right down in the description on YouTube. So you can click right over to these campaigns from there and either get in the pre-launch or back this campaign and some others. But how long is this issue? Is it like 24, 32? How big is the issue?
22 pages of story.
Okay. And you can get all the other previous issues, I assume, as well.
Yeah, we're doing it in both available in single issue format or as the graphic novel version of the first arc.
Cool. So definitely.
I will point out the graphic novel version has a little more content that enriches things.
All right. Let me see if I can bring that. Is that down on the campaign here?
Yeah, you just,
Okay.
I think so. You just have to scroll down a little bit further.
Okay. Yeah. So digital releases of everything. These books, which are great, and also in the same world as American Dreams. A lot of great different covers here. I love this is Netho Diaz here, right? This one and the second.
Yeah, that's our issue 1 variant at the time.
Yeah, that one's such a great cover. And so you can catch up on all of Daniel's other work, in addition to the Libertyverse, which I guess is what we call it here.
Yeah.
That has all the stuff. So that's awesome. So this is, I think, a great point to jump onto the story. And it's great that you can get all the other, the build up to this as well. Just get a really good idea of this world and this character. So we'll jump back to this before we leave, but let me go through a roundup of a few other comics I think people will want to check out. I'm so glad that the media tab worked here. I love playing my stupid little cartoon transitions here. Makes me very, they don't work, and StreamYard has been giving us trouble lately. But the first one here is Angel Hunter. It's a 5x7 seinen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Manga inspired epic dark fantasy. So I've gotten to look a little bit at this book. It is really a really intense concept. It's mankind being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. There are these angels running around, monsters. It's a kind of a harsh environment, but I think it's really gripping. Everything I've seen from it. It's great characters, great conflicts, a really interesting world, and I think this one's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, we'll get Rich on soon to tell us more about this book. But you can head over in the link in the description to get on the pre-launch list here for when this does launch pretty soon. So this is certainly an exciting book that just has a really cool manga vibe. I love this image and this logo. It just gives me this feels like 90s manga in a way. I really can't put my finger on, but really enjoy. Next one I want to show off is my book, We Are Scarlet Twilight, Cobalt Crisis Part 1. This is basically Crisis on Infinite Earths or Secret Wars if it had been created in the 1940s. I wasn't sure I was going to come back to this story. I liked how the first one ended, but left the door just cracked open a little bit if I had a better idea than the one I had initially. But I was reading Crisis, and then something kind of hit me. I said, okay, there are so many cool tropes we've seen here in Crisis and in comics, the big two crossovers since, that we're really used to and like seeing, but we've never seen in that Golden Age pulpy style. So I thought, hey, that's a good enough reason to go back and create more adventures with Captain Lancet. So this one's going to be really fun. It's all written. I'm drawing the first issue now. Hopefully, should be done with that soon, and we'll get this one launched as soon as we have the last. I have just a handful of comics left from the countdown to Cobalt Crisis left to fulfill, and once those get out the door and we have them all, make sure that's in everybody's hands. we'll launch this one. So I couldn't be more excited about that. And the last one I want to show off is I Need Your Skin. Joey Galvez is kind of creating this one with a team, Alan Dunford from Grandma Chainsaw and some other books, Brian Blondo on art, which is doing a great job. I love the art for this. And I think Joey just updated this one a little bit. So there are new pages that you can see here on the pre-launch, and that give you a little bit more of an idea of the series than we've shown so far. A lot of cool covers. I love this one. This one is just so striking. A really great headline image that I think is unignorable and really fun. This one, oh, he's got this one up. I did this one. This is a tribute to the Misfits, which I'm not super familiar with, but I really only listen to 80s music and soundtracks. But I think if you're a Misfit punk fan, you'll probably recognize the image. I think it turned out pretty well. I kind of did the illustration, and Joey went in and did some of the design here and did a great job. But to get to some of these new pages and tell you about the story a little bit, this is about a woman who's pretty vain, gets presented with this bargain to preserve her youth from this mysterious woman. And as often happens in horror comics, things take a turn from there. So this one's really exciting, and I don't want to say too much because it's not my book, but Joey shared some of the plans on where this overall story is going, and it is really, really cool. This story itself is really fun, but I think the hook for how this introduces and springboards into other things is really like, dude, that's a cool idea. I cannot wait to see how that all goes. So head over to on the link in the description to this to get in the pre-launch, and when they launch it, you'll be the first to know. And I'll tell you, this one is going to be a lot of fun. You're not going to want to miss it, especially when the rest of these books that kind of come out based on this, and you see how you'll see what it's doing, you'll see how it's taking shape, and just from what I've been told about it, it's very cool. So exciting stuff. But I think that'll do it. Want to get back and urge everyone to check out American Dreams. Get on board for this new story arc. You can check out the old ones and get this one to where it needs to be. But yeah, I think that'll do it for us. Daniel, thank you for coming on and sharing the book with us and telling us all the stuff about the creation of the book and everything.
Thank you for having me on. Cool.
All right. Well, I think that'll do it for us. We will see you all next week with some more great indie comics. Oh, wait a second. There's one more. Joey's telling us about the stuff I alluded to earlier on I Need Your Skin, which is the 7 Deadly verse. I like that. That's catchy. But yeah, I don't want to say too much more. I'll leave that to Joey when he's back. I don't want to spoil anything, but what they told me about this is very, very cool. So definitely excited to hear more about that, and just can't urge anybody enough to get on the pre-launch for that. Well, like I said, that'll do it. We will see you guys next week, and until then, take care and keep reading those comics.